Today, we are going to be discussing the alarming new partnership between Flock and Amazon Ring and how this fits into the broader expansion of how AI technology is being used to expand the surveillance powers of ICE, the police, and law enforcement agencies in general.
Yeah, so I mean, why are we here today? So back in October 2025, Flock and Amazon Ring announced their partnership, which connects Amazon Ring's millions of private security cameras, with privacy, with Flock's nationwide surveillance network used by police departments to track license plates. So it's been reported that ICE and other federal agencies have accessed Flock data regularly from local police by both legal and backdoor means. So these collaborations should give us all pause about the current dangers of government and corporate collusion. And these corporations are fueling a vast state surveillance architecture that will further enact violence on our people unless we stop them.
That is right. But today, we've invited an amazing panel of folks that can really help us organize to stop them. But before we get into all of that, we really want to hear from everyone here. So please put in the chat who you are, where you're calling in from, and if you wanted to share a little bit about what brought you here. We know there are a lot of folks that are in active campaigns that are trying to figure things out in their local cities right now. So we want to hear where you're calling in from and what made you come here today. But please make sure you'll see the chat's a little bit confusing. Make sure you are selecting everyone and not just host and panelists because we all want to get to know each other.
So I'm going to read out loud some folks who are joining us. I see DC, D Flock DC is in the house. Somebody from Mankato, Minnesota. Amanda from Nashville, Tennessee.
Ohio, Wisconsin.
And
Oh, we got,
apologies, folks. It looks like, you might not be able to select the everyone option, but we'll keep reading them out loud.
oh yeah, these are all to host and panelists, folks. Make sure if you do have the option for everyone. But we have people from all across the country. San Antonio in the house. We got some tech workers here. Ooh, Minneapolis. Georgia. Okay, we have a really great Phoenix. Yay, Arizona. Okay, we got a lot of great folks here. Let's go.
And that's what's up. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. As folks heard, we'll be recording today's discussion as we are live streaming on our social media channels. And if you're joining us on Zoom, you can leave comments in the chat or in the Q&A box. We'll be answering your questions in the chat and the Q&A box throughout the conversation, and we'll do our best to also follow up. So definitely, please let us know where you're joining us from and what questions you have.
Great. Okay. So, for us at Media Justice, we've been tracking a lot of the ways that tech corporations are aligning with the far right Trump administration and colluding to really restrict protest, go against any form of dissent, surveil and detain our people, and weaponize technology in every way possible. And we know that this is part of what they call the so-called AI race, right? That demands a massive build out of data centers that suck up our water, our energy, are poisoning our communities, where they're still the place where they're capturing our information, and all of this without our consent. And it's important to know who these corporations are, right? Amazon is one of just three corporations that together use up nearly 60% of hyperscale data center infrastructure. So these are really big players.
Yeah, and the Trump regime has gone all in on the expansion of the surveillance state. What we call the One Big Ugly Bill, or HR 1, slashed close to $1 trillion in healthcare and food assistance. At the same time, though, handing over $170 billion to tech and private prison corporations to dramatically expand anti-immigrant enforcement. More wealth and authoritarian power for tech oligarchs, and surveillance and repression for the rest of us.
And for years, this AI has been used as a weapon by ICE, by the Department of Homeland Security, by Border Patrol to target migrants for deportation. And we know that the same history of surveillance is built on anti-Blackness, it's built on xenophobia, settler colonialism, and AI isn't the exception to this history. Today surveillance tech is being built on the same violent legacies that are targeting Black and Brown people, migrants, Native people, trans folks, poor people, and all of our movements for justice. And I think that's what kind of gets us in the mix of why we have to fight back.
Yeah, and the violence that we've been seeing, right, and witnessing by ICE in cities across this country is in large part being facilitated by tech corporations who provide the technology for Trump and other authoritarians abroad. Flock's partnership with Amazon's Ring further consolidates the surveillance state. So this deal that we've talked about and that we're here to learn more about between Ring and Flock allows them to tap into millions of private security cameras and add those live streams to Flock's AI surveillance network. But this creates a nationwide searchable database of millions of everyday people's movements without requiring a warrant. And so before we continue, let's just back up a minute and just learn a little bit about what is Flock and why is it a problem, right? So Flock started in 2017 by three Georgia Tech bros. Their signature surveillance product, Flock Safety, is one of the largest automated license plate readers, or ALPRs, LPRs for short, in the market. There are currently over 80,000 Flock cameras installed across the country, with Flock self-reporting that they are in 49 states. So it's important to note that Flock got ahead in the industry early on by illegally strapping hundreds of cameras onto the Department of Transportation infrastructure. And, normally this would be considered a crime in many states, but when it comes to surveilling our people, they can get away with quite a lot.
And it's important to know like ALPRs, besides being a very fun tongue twister to say repeatedly, are AI-powered cameras that are capturing license plates and other details, other data from our passing vehicles. And this means that police and ICE are able to follow folks, are able to detain and terrorize people by using this technology to track people without a warrant, without establishing probable cause for its surveillance. And Flock has, customers that include over 5,000 law enforcement agencies, but they're also working with private companies like Home Depot, Lowe's, some neighborhood associations. So it's important to track both how they're working with the cops, but also private businesses. And the thing about this, partnership between Ring and Flock is before Flock's nationwide database could access about 80,000 surveillance cameras across the country. But having this partnership makes them access over 10 million private home and business security cameras into that database. So it really expands their reach in a really crazy kind of way.
Yeah, for sure. I remember when I first started hearing about Flock, it was like through neighborhood associations trying to adopt it, and slowly they've been scaling up a lot, right? And now we're seeing what they're doing. And Flock has consistently misled the public about the access they provide to Border Patrol and other government agencies. As we've seen with the explosion of surveillance infrastructure targeting Black and Brown communities, state violence has also escalated. So in 2025, at least 32 people have died in ICE custody, making it the deadliest year in 2 decades. And already 12 people have died or been killed by ICE just since the beginning of this year.
It's fucking awful. But beyond these automated license plate readers, Flock is also using its AI surveillance technology to include drones, what they like to call gun detection software, and they're also integrating this into Palantir's predictive policing platforms. And it's not that surprising given that Flock is financially backed by the tech oligarchs, including Mark Andreessen and one that I like to talk about a lot, Mr. Peter Thiel, who is the Palantir chairman and also a noted antichrist enthusiast. So good things to note on him.
Yep, and I see in the chat, shame, echo that, shame, shame. So, to rewind a little bit back to Amazon and their Ring cameras, folks may have heard about back in 2019, it was revealed that the company was partnering with police and providing them with unprecedented access to video doorbell devices. In 2020, as the Black Lives Matter uprisings were happening here and globally, it was revealed that Ring was enabling police departments to racially profile and target Black people. This partnership further increased the likelihood of violent and deadly encounters between police and Black communities. And in LA, it was revealed that the LAPD was using Amazon Ring to surveil the protests.
And it's this history of collaboration between the police and Ring that led to previous organizing, right? By Media Justice, by other groups. And in 2024, folks were able to fight back and win to shut down the police's ability to request footage from private security cameras. It was a huge win. Shout out to all of the organizers who were part of all of those efforts. And MJ also pressured stations and viewers not to watch the quote unquote Ring Nation TV show, which led to its dismal rollout that year and brought attention to all of the attempts to popularize and normalize this type of propaganda that's really disguised as entertainment, even though we really know what it's trying to do.
Yep, and with the current authoritarian regime and the push for all things AI, it's not surprising that Amazon Ring is cashing in on this moment and going back to full collaboration with the police. They rehired their cop-loving executive, Jamie Siminoff, while receiving a record $64 million to provide cloud services for ICE and Customs and Border Protection, CBP.
Okay, but enough from us, Danny. We have an amazing panel of organizers and advocates that are going to tell us a lot more about both this partnership between Flock and Amazon, and what it means, but also what we need to do to stop it. These are folks that have been doing amazing research, amazing organizing, and can really give us a lot of tools to be able to build up the power to change what we're seeing. So I will pass it over to you to start with the intros.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us to our amazing panelists. We're joined by Andrea Marcos of the University of Washington Center for Human Rights, James Birch of the Black Solutions Lab, Sarah Hamid of Electronic Frontier Foundation, and Hamid Khan of Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. And our first guest, Andrea of the University of Washington, we'll start with you. So your report, Leaving the Door Wide Open, Flock Surveillance Systems Expose Washington Data to Immigration Enforcement, which was released in October, revealed how Border Patrol has been accessing Flock's ALPR's data operated by 18 different law enforcement agencies in Washington state. You've been tracking the way that Flock data is being used to surveil abortion seekers, protesters, and migrants. So can you just like break it down for us? How does this technology work? How are the cops using these tech weapons, and like what does this collusion look like?
Yeah. I feel like I'm on a panel plus just seeing what folks are writing in the chat full of like experts on this. So I'm like, cool. In another world, I'm like, let's all talk about it. But I will. So thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and connect with y'all. So I'm Andrea from the Center for Human Rights. We do a lot of research on immigrant rights work in Washington State. That includes monitoring conditions at our detention center in Tacoma, Washington, the Northwest ICE Processing Center. We research ICE air flights in Washington State, and we monitor compliance with our state sanctuary laws, which is how we led into doing work around surveillance and ALPRs and Flock. So what collaboration are our local police, state agencies having with federal immigration enforcement? So that's kind of how we got into it. And I'm just going to share if this works. And if it doesn't, I'll ditch this idea. Is this working okay for folks?
Looks good.
Okay, cool. I am going to I'm going to give up on finding you all again, making eye contact because I can't see anything anymore. Okay, so here's the like title pages for the reports about surveillance that we've done. So we started with Who's Watching Washington. This was a report we released in 2022. And it was about the dangers of looking at ALPRs in general and what threats do they have to immigrant and reproductive rights in Washington state, and also people coming or being in Washington who are seeking gender affirming care. And then about last year, so 3 years later, we got into looking at Flock in particular because 404 Media and EFF, found that there was the woman in Texas who was being searched in Flock databases after a self-administered abortion. So one of the hits that came out in that reporting, which thank you to 404 and EFF, one of the hits that came out on those Flock networks was there were two hits in Washington, one in Yakima and Prosser. And so we, as a research center, were like, oh, let's look into this. And we just started public record requesting. We got a list of all the jurisdictions that we knew were using flock across Washington state. And we put in a bunch of record requests. And what we got back, I'm going to skip over this part a little bit and I'm back up, like how do license plate readers work? Because you all kind of talked about it in the beginning. And I got my eye on the time a little bit, but this was our 2022 report, kind of thinking like what's going on and how is this connected to law enforcement? Where are they? They're stationary, they're mobile, they're on cars. How are they connected to databases? And so then kind of fast forward to what I was just talking about, we have this report where this woman in Texas had had an abortion. So we started to follow up, like, how is this going on in Washington and what else can we find? Is there anything about immigration enforcement that we can find? Washington has the Keep Washington Working Law. It's a sanctuary law that limits local law enforcement and state agencies from working with federal immigration to enforce criminal immigration enforcement. So there's lots of limitations to this law, and one of the things we do is try to track when, because there's no enforcement mechanism with this law, so we try to track like who's breaking this law and how can we stop that from happening. Here's an example. You can just see like the had an abortion, search for a female is the reason list. So, and for anyone who hasn't seen this before, this is an example if you file a public records request of what from a network audit. It's just a long document showing who under the name thing, who's doing the search, what the organizational name is, how many networks they searched. And I won't go through all of this, but one of the things that we do is we do a lot of public records requests at the Center for Human Rights. And we've worked with a lot of other organizations who are like, I want to do more requests around like police and jurisdictions in my state or in
Andrea,
my neighborhood. Yeah,
sorry to interrupt. Just I'm gonna ask you to slow down a little bit for
yeah,
interpretation.
yeah. Thanks. And I
Thank you.
can't see the chat right now, so thanks, sir.
It's all
Yeah.
good. You're good.
Okay. So I just want to plug that like if you are doing public records requests and having a hard time understanding what you're getting back, email us. We love working with folks to kind of figure out like how can we get more information to the people who need it so we can hold folks accountable and make our and like work towards collective liberation. So just offering that. So we kind of dug into this. And then what we found is, let's see, is this going to work? Okay, cool. So we requested from 48 jurisdictions and we requested org audits, network sharing reports, and transparency portals. You don't have to request the transparency portals. And this is like all the details, right? So I think one thing that makes it hard, as you all know, kind of like coming up against these big tech companies is one, they're not public institutions necessarily. They don't have to share based on the records laws. They don't have to share information with us. Their tech is always changing. So it was a lot of piecing things together. And I'll kind of, unless it's interesting, but for the sake of time, I'll spare kind of going into like what is an organization audit versus what is a network audit. But so we requested different things. And we found out that there were kind of three ways that we kind of made sense of how data was being shared with immigration enforcement agencies. And this is similar to a lot of other findings that folks in other states have been doing and across the nation. So the first one is kind of this one-to-one sharing. King County in Washington state has Flock and they're going to share with Pierce County. They're on my one-to-one sharing. Whatever happens in Pierce I can see and I can search from King County and vice versa. We found, although it's against state law, that some jurisdictions in Washington did have one-to-one sharing with CBP. So that was on their like, yes, you can have access to our data. We also found this kind of like backdoor access. And I want to be clear that we're using this door metaphor, but oftentimes backdoor access refers to when the federal government subpoenas an organization or a company and says you have to give us this information and they have to give. So that's often like kind of how people think about a backdoor, I think. But in this case, and this kind of came out as we were researching. So there's a function, and I'm sure y'all, like half of people probably in this room or in this Zoom room have heard of this, but there's a function, the national lookup function. And what happened last year is that Flock, without telling people, did a pilot program with ICE and CBP, and they included federal agencies, those federal agencies, in this national lookup function. And the Flock settings for who you share with are settings that you go in and you toggle a button. So if a lot of times, one thing we heard all the time after this report, police offices being like, oh, we didn't know. We didn't really know how to use it. And so it was like incredibly alarming. Um, so they had these national lookup things enabled, and Flock didn't had a pilot program with Border Patrol, and so Border Patrol was accessing. They could search basically whoever had that national lookup toggle on. They were searching their data. Um, and so the third kind of way we found is these side door access. So in this case, it's searching for things on behalf of agents. So we found a lot of local agencies who, in their search reason, would be like immigration or HSI. So it would be like an agent gonna be like, hey, can you search this person for me or this license plate for me? We found so that could happen through like a local agent searching on behalf of a federal immigration enforcement agency, or it could happen by a neighboring state jurisdiction searching on behalf. Because if an agent in Idaho who doesn't have the sanctuary laws that Washington has is searching, it's not technically a violation. There's more to say, again, for the sake of time, about like all of the different things that we found. But so here you can kind of see, here's just like a map we made of some of the who was doing these kind of like one-to-one sharing, who was doing this network, the kind of pilot program backdoor, who was doing these like side door, I'm going to search on behalf of you. And almost all the agencies had these side door searches where law enforcement from other states were searching on behalf of ICE. You talked a little bit about, I'm probably coming up on time soon. You talked a little bit about like, so how is Flock being used to monitor protesters? We haven't actually, as the Center for Human Rights, we haven't done a lot of requests around that in particular. But once our report came out, we started working with Range Media from Spokane, and they did a series that's really great. If folks haven't seen it, you can like search to hear some of the names of the articles, but they did a series on Flock that's really good. And they found that, let's see, it's 6 months of records show that Spokane County Sheriff's Office made 24 searches across thousands of cameras for cars at protests. And they have policies saying that Flock cameras should not be used based on First Amendment activities. And I think that this is like the risk of what happens when you try to regulate, right? I think the question is like, what do we do? And you can regulate Flock cameras, but there's so much like people aren't going to use anyway. Because we'll talk about that next when folks are sharing what they're organizing with. But there's a lot of issues around regulating, and if we didn't have them to begin with, then we wouldn't have to figure out all of these loopholes around policing people, or policing the police, basically being like, what are you doing with this data? Another example of how they were searching it is these names of searches. You can kind of see like the Operation Pimp Juice and Serial Beer Thief. And like this kind of points to how Flock works just really quickly. Like Flock, if you are an accessed user to a network, all you have to do is put in basically a reason, maybe a case number. And those are supposed to be the safeguards for monitoring how users are accessing the data, and if they're doing it for the purpose of quote unquote safety. But there's no regulation on these searches, and so people can just put whatever they want. In cases found by this reporter in Spokane, they had reasons like TBD or bad guy or XXX or ongoing investigation. And EFF published an article about finding a bunch of slurs in the reasons, and including so there's a lot of different ways that Flock, at least in Washington State, and I'm sure is across the nation being used. And I'll kind of like one more thing to say. This last thing, happy holidays. Here's all our flock data is this reporter putting out everything so that if anyone else, if that's helpful for anyone's work. And we have an appendix in our report around like, here's the language that we used for our public request, public records request, in case that's helpful. And then the last thing I'll say is, I'll just breeze through this real quick. Our newest report, here, I'll leave you here. Our newest report looks at the Department of Licensing data sharing with ICE and CBP. And I think that this is really important to talk about with Flock because Flock is only helpful if you have the information on the car connected to a person you're looking for. And ICE and CBP, they are getting the information, they're connecting people to their cars through accessing Department of Licensing data. And in Washington State, there's a lot of laws that say they can't do that, yet that's still happening. And so they're doing it through this data sharing program called NLITS. There's more to say about that, but it's kind of like a whole system of like, how are people accessing data, and then what are the tools that they're using to find people. So at least in Washington, we have they blocked ICE, ERO, and ICE HSI from accessing this data, DOL data via NLITS, but CBP still has access. So I just want to like name that these are examples of records request information we've got. But I'll stop there, and thanks for, anyway, all the research, and happy to answer any follow-up questions, and also happy to support with record request or anything like that.
Awesome. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Andrea. We appreciate it. Now we're gonna turn over to a local example of organizing against Flock. And so we're gonna turn to James, who is the founder of Black Solutions Lab. And so James, in October 2023, the city of Oakland entered an agreement with Flock to have nearly 300 ALPRs across the city. So first, like, what are the ramifications of this level of surveillance against our communities? And then I also know that, this agreement came up for renewal late last year, and y'all did a lot of dope, powerful organizing. But despite all that public pressure and opposition to this renewal, the council still voted to renew, right? So like, what lessons do you have to share with folks? And, what do you think is most impactful in the resistance against Flock?
Right on. Thanks so much, Danny, and thanks so much to y'all for inviting me and to the panelists for being here. And shout out to Sarah for all the incredible work she did in Oakland. Again, my name is James Burt. I'm the founder of the Black Solutions Lab. We're an organization focused on advancing public safety solutions, primarily in Oakland. I think it's important to set the stage when it comes to California politics, and specifically Oakland politics. Like many cities, Oakland has a lot of city council members who were elected in the backlash to the George Floyd rebellion. Right. And so there are a lot of law and order candidates whose primary focus is climbing the political ladder. Right. And so with this Flock fight, we knew we were entering a political climate where we're almost certainly going to lose. Slow down. Right on. Um, uh, uh, this law and order ticket is trying to make the police lobby happy. Right. And so supporting Flock, which is obviously something that the police want very badly, is something a lot of these politicians knew that if they didn't support, come elections in November, they could find themselves, facing another candidate who is more ready to support the police lobby and do their bidding. Right. That's a situation a lot of cities are facing. But backing up a little, starting our relationship with Flock, as you mentioned, in 2023, Oakland entered the agreement with Flock amidst a lot of publicity. Gavin Newsom was working with then Mayor Sheng Tao, and both of them wanted to improve their public image with respects to crime. Right, so they engaged in a series of law and order efforts in the city that included the implementation of these 300 cameras. Right, and since they were implemented, at times the city and Newsom have used these cameras to propagandize law and order. Right, there's been this narrative that Newsom and the city have been pumping. We're cleaning up. We're fighting back against crime, regardless of what the numbers say. Look at the things we've done, and pointing at Flock cameras as a solution to crime has been central to their narrative. And what's important to understand is, regardless of what the facts say, if city officials, state officials are pushing that narrative and they're saying Flock is going to reduce crime, they're going to come back and tell you it's been done. Right? That's how it works. And then they're going to pat themselves on the back and talk about the next, technology that they need to implement. Right? And so it's really So that's the backdrop of the situation we're facing in Oakland when this new contract comes about. Um, Danny, you asked about the ramifications. I think it's important to put that in the backdrop as well. As the ramifications is the data from the city of Oakland has been shown to be shared with the federal government, like you're describing, right? There's a lawsuit currently by Secure Justice. There's a good article by the SF Standard, that documents the information going from OPD to the SF Police Department to the federal government, right? That's what we know about, right? I'm sure the countless amount of times that data has been shared that we don't know about is much more concerning and something that we might never, get our hands on. Perhaps if this lawsuit moves forward, there'll be some discovery that we can come back and talk about. Um, uh, okay, so that's and again that's the major use case that cities are that we're trying to avoid, that Oakland's saying that it can protect against, and that's happening almost endlessly, right? But I think what's most important to talk about today as a local organizer is what happens when a city like Oakland implements a technology like Flock, and the sticky situation that organizers get in when police and Flock control the data, right? And I call it a sticky situation because once a city like Oakland gets one of these public safety technologies, it's really difficult to get rid of, right? Whether it's Flock or ShotSpotter or real-time crime data centers or ALPRs or whatever the technology might be, right? It becomes a situation where we're asking council members not to renew a contract as opposed to not starting it in the first place. And that puts us in a very difficult situation because of the limited access we have to data, right? Uh, you know, when the police and the city are talking about Flock, it seems like they can magic up, whatever data they want, saying, Flock saved X lives, Flock, uh, it's almost like a Mad Libs, right? They just plug in the technology and tell you why it was so great and using conclusory language. And there's almost no way that we have to challenge it. We're not given the raw data to analyze. It's not a third party doing an audit, right? It's literally the Flock representative and the police spokesperson telling us how great these technologies are. And all we have is 1 minute to give public comment, to challenge their narrative. Right, but again, it's a part of a dog and pony show where the council members have already made their decision. They know that they're going to vote for Flock. They're not listening to what we say and thinking, "Wow, you guys have compelled me with by explaining that this data is going to be misused or there's plenty of ways to give it access to." That's not what's important to these council members. What's important to these council members is how many votes this is going to cost them, right? And whether or not aligning with Flock will allow them to continue to move up the political ladder, right? And so knowing this and uh, entering into the situation, is really, again, mindful of time, is really challenging for our coalition, right? Because this wasn't the fight back against Flock wasn't this latest iteration. Well, let me say two things. First, when we tried to fight back against this in 2021, there wasn't interest, right? It wasn't popular interest. It was hard to get a large base of support. There are plenty of grassroots folks who have been always sounding alarm about this. Shout out to them, right? There have been, niche nonprofits who focus on this work or CBOs who focus on this work. But, when talking about it and specifically using the language of, hey, if a new federal regime comes in, they're going to use this against you, right? Or talking about the potential for a Trump-like regime to come in and do what ICE is doing, those arguments weren't compelling, right? It's only, in 2025 and 2026 when it's actually happening that we found that when we send out the alarm again and say, hey, look what Flock is doing, look what's happening and what could happen in the city of Oakland, all of a sudden we got a lot of, the mass movement energy that has been generated by organizers across the country in response to Trump, right, is one of the main reasons why we were able to do so well in Oakland. Um, um, but again, we need to, one of the lessons, to carry from this is in the face of a situation where we might be losing, what is the goal of the campaign? Right? I know one of our goals in the city of Oakland was to make sure we set up a situation where people could be held accountable. Right? We made a lot of noise, we got a lot of press, we put it in the public, in the public marketplace of ideas. And so And so when elections come back in November, people will know, and they've learned more about what Flock does and they've seen more from Trump. They'll know which politicians were and were not willing to put them in the line of fire when it comes to the federal government. And then one more thing I think it's important. Um, oh my God, I had so many more things to say. One more thing I had that's important is um, uh, doing the deep work of explaining what the harms of Flock in the off times when things aren't, the harms of technologies in the off times when things are at a flashpoint, right? These things require deep work going block to block, right? Unfortunately for us, the police are doing that work. They're going block to block using neighborhood councils, using all sorts of, informal networks to propagandize the value of surveillance. So when these fights happen, there are a lot of believers already on their side, and we're kind of fighting an uphill battle, right? We need to be doing, fundamental organizing and block by block organizing if we're going to really change uh, uh, the status quo when it comes to such a complicated conversation. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much for all of that, James, and such important fights. And I couldn't agree with you more that we have to be doing the organizing work to kind of get ready for those flashpoint moments. And to help us precisely prepare for that, I want to introduce our next speaker. Our next guest is the brilliant Sarah Hamid of Electronic Frontier Foundation. Sarah, EFF has been investigating flock surveillance for a while now, and particularly your research has documented how flock surveillance infrastructure facilitates the tracking of protesters, discrimination against Romani people, abortion seekers by law enforcement, just to name a few of the things that you've been working on. And you've also been supporting a lot of community-led resistance groups that are working against these flock contracts. So, hearing a little bit of the context that James just shared with us and all of your experience, what have you seen as opportunities for community members and organizations to like block proposals, to block renewals, both of Flock but other surveillance companies? And what have you seen in those situations to be like the most effective strategies?
Awesome. First of all, thanks so much, James, for all the work y'all did in Oakland. Andrea, for the research that you're doing, the critical movement research you're doing right now. And also, shout out to Media Justice for holding learning spaces like this one that is circulating life-preserving and critical information through our movement ecosystem. For my portion, I really want to focus on where communities have leverage because Ring and Flock are not neutral tools that occasionally get misused. They are infrastructure for mass surveillance designed to make it easier to track where we drive, where we visit, where we protest, what protests we attend, and where we seek care. And so I want to focus on two parts. The first is I want to walk through where communities have leverage in the procurement process, which is new contracts, renewals, and simply letting deals lapse. And then I want to share some concrete strategies communities have used across the country to say no contract, no network, and ultimately to say no to mass surveillance. So let me start with talking about a framework that we've been kind of using since this past year at EFF, procurement power. And the argument here, or the analysis here, is that procurement isn't just paperwork. Every time a city signs or refuses to sign, in many cases last year, a contract with Flock or Axon or ShotSpotter or any surveillance profiteer, it's making a decision about what safety looks like and whose safety counts. And over the last year, we've seen at least 24 jurisdictions that have either rejected, ended, or refused to renew their flock safety contracts. Places like Austin, Hays County, and San Marcos in Texas, Evanston and Oak Park in Illinois, Eugene and Springfield in Oregon, go Ducks. These were not courts swooping in, right? These were procurement decisions, councils voting no, letting pilots lapse, terminating contracts for cause, or simply declining to expand. And there's three key leverage points in that life cycle that I want to lift up. New proposals and pilots, renewals and extensions, and changing the logic of procurement. So first, new proposals. A huge part of Flock's expansion depends on keeping these deals really boring and invisible for as long as possible, right? The pattern goes like this. The company offers a no-cost pilot. Maybe it's funded by a police foundation or a business improvement district, right? The cameras go up, police start using the system, and months later, the contract appears on the agenda framed as a simple continuation of services. You're going to see words like renewal, technology service agreement, public safety cameras, and it's often buried in the consent agenda. This is the first opportunity that communities have to break that script. And that means tracking the entire pipeline, not just the final vote. Paying very close attention to how surveillance purchasing gets normalized through these pilots and being a watchdog for that entire pipeline from the beginning. So, you and your partners in the community watching agendas for vague terms like technology service or data platforms or public safety camera solution and asking yourself, is this Flock? Is this Axon? Is this an APR? It also means building relationships with people who can slow or stop the purchase. In many of the successful campaigns, at least one council member, commissioner, or city manager was willing to pull an item off a consent agenda, insist on a public hearing, or refuse to sign an administrative extension. But most importantly, that means leading with concrete harms. You're not walking into these city council hearings talking about metadata. You're walking in talking about protesters being tracked, communities that are being targeted, abortion seekers that are being hunted, and our immigrant neighbors being put in danger. You connect these documented abuses to your city's decision and hold those lawmakers accountable, just like James is saying. The next is renewals, right? That's your second biggest leverage point. So Flock's business model depends on autopilot. Once the cameras are up, police are trained on the system, and the company expects that those contracts roll over more or less forever. But that changed when communities and some officials started treating renewal moments as chances to say, no, we're done. Take Austin, they let the Flock pilot expire instead of renewing it in the context of strong community concern about being part of this nationwide network being used for immigration enforcement and abortion policing. This was a choice. It was a decision to use procurement power to step back from the network. In Hays County in San Marcos, Texas officials rejected renewals after asking very basic questions like, is there a measurable public safety benefit to this purchase? What are the civil liberties costs? And do we want to be contractually tied to a company that is enabling abuse elsewhere? So, across all of these fights, procurement power is showing up in three ways. First, termination, using breaches of law, broken promises, or misrepresentations as a ground to end the contract. Second, non-renewal, making a deliberate political decision not to renew rather than allowing the contracts to silently roll over and letting it lapse. And third, refusing to expand, even when cameras remain for a time, drawing a line and saying no, no more upsells, no additional neighborhoods, no integrations. Some of these wins are very, very messy. I feel like sometimes in our movement spaces, we're accustomed to and we kind of want very clean ideological wins. Some of these are like very messy procurement decisions, right? Just working through the teeniest, tiniest bureaucratic loopholes. But at the end of the day, it comes out sum total to procurement power. Communities absolutely saying no to flock ALPR cameras and these kinds of police surveillance systems. The last piece, changing the logic of procurement. So we want to change how people, especially our elected officials, think about tech procurement in the first place. For a long time, they treated these decisions as technical or administrative. And in many ways, in doing so, they abdicated responsibility over these decisions. But technology purchasing is not an administrative decision. It's a political decision when that technology puts your immigrant neighbors at risk, right? These are very political decisions. So we're starting to see a shift as cities realize things like cooperative purchasing agreements and no-cost trials are not neutral tools. The next thing I want to talk about is why better features won't fix this. Because Flock's favorite move all last year when they're under pressure is to say, we'll fix it with new features and better policies. And I think Andrea hinted a little bit about this conversation. So recently they've rolled out and promised so-called privacy features like stronger audit tools, search controls, refined retention settings. And the pitch is with the right setting and the right policies, these systems can be made safe. And our analysis is no, they can't. ALPRs have been around for 60 years. That means 60 years of governance failures. We've seen guardrail after guardrail after guardrail after guardrail fail, right? And the core problems are built into the design. This is a nationwide network optimized for cross-jurisdictional sharing. Officers can query tens of thousands of cameras across the network with very little friction. And the product is built to encourage maximum sharing by framing every connection as a collaboration and every agency as a node in a safety network. The supposed safeguard depends on how officers choose to label their work, and in some case, as recent media reporting has revealed, they're being coached to use vague search terms to work around those systems as well. They can call an abortion investigation a missing person case, right? They can call a protest surveillance just an investigation. And at the same time, Flock is pushing new capabilities. While all of this controversy is happening, they're pushing new capabilities like always listening microphones for distress detection and quietly cleaning up its marketing language when people are raising concerns about wiretapping. So this is not a company that's focused on narrow, specific, or necessary tool. It's a company that's constantly looking for new ways to collect data in more places and for more purposes. And the conclusion is simple. No software update rather can make a system like this safe. So what does that mean in terms of strategy, especially under a Trump regime that is eager to weaponize infrastructure like this? It means that campaigns actually cost Flock money and market share when they combine these different kinds of power. First, people who are willing to use procurement power to end pilots. Second, organized communities who refuse to accept cosmetic fixes. The demand is very clear right now. Turn the cameras off. And third, shared research and technical support that turn dense logs and contracts like the one that Andrea shared into clear talking points that the system has been used to target our community members. It's been used to enact racist searches. It's been used to hunt down abortion seekers, and our city does not want to buy into that. So I'm going to close with this, is that Flock and Ring are trying to sell a worldview where safety means permanent suspicion, where your car, your front door, these function as checkpoints, where data about your most intimate choices can be pulled up and weaponized on demand. We've already seen that, but we've already seen last year and continue to see this year, communities are pushing back and saying no, and they're treating procurement as a site of struggle. Austin did it, Hayes County did it, Evanston, Oak Park, Eugene, Springfield, many others. The list keeps growing. I can't even keep up this year. The wins, we just keep clocking them, right? And every no is an opportunity for us to build durable community power against mass surveillance and the surveillance state. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. And let's keep the wins coming, y'all. Let's get that list longer and make sure that it's popping up more and more places. Um, some of the stuff that you're saying reminds me a lot of the conversations we've been having around data centers, right? You're not going to fight a data center and it's going to be your zoning board, or it's going to be around water. It's going to be, so we have to kind of get into these local democratic places to be able to create that change. Thank you so much for Sarah, and hope folks were taking good notes and adding their names to the list. And last but definitely not least, we have Hamid Khan from Stop LAPD from Spying Coalition. Um, Hamid, Stop LAPD Spying has been sounding the alarm about a range of surveillance tech weapons at the hands of the police for a minute now. And over time, we've seen more and more how these tech companies are pitching their products, right? Similar to what Sarah was mentioning right now, talking anything about Amazon Ring to Axon to Flock. What tactics have you noticed in terms and tracked around how these companies are trying to entice local agencies to use their products? And specifically, like, how does connecting these private cameras like Ring to police put us at risk, right? The last two speakers have spoken fire about Flock, right? But this partnership with Ring really gives them access to 10 million cameras. I mean, like, what would that mean for us, and what are the risks?
Well, thank you, first of all. Really appreciate it. And great to hear other folks bring up some really critical things. I mean, just to sum it all up, we're trying to shut this shit down because you can't reform this sick system. It has to be abolition. And that's where our work has to go. I mean, I think when we talk about policing technology, one of the ways that at least I've thought it over the last 30 plus years is that mapping out this trajectory from the 90s CompStat to the 2020s real-time crime center and everything in between, that how these technologies have evolved and really kind of just has been massively deployed, and how much money had been made out of that. I mean, when we look at police technology market, it's close to about 20 to 25 billion dollars. and it's not going anywhere. It's, if anything, it's going to keep on expanding, and Amazon happens to be one of the biggest players. Nothing new. They've been around for a minute. So, when we are looking at Amazon, it's the same kind of like, just system that they have set up for other merchants and providers as well, where they sort of become this a connector between startups and help them introduce to law enforcement agencies and the broader stalker state, as we call it. So Amazon has been a major player. Just more recently, since they have acquired Flock, or I mean Ring, they've expanded their business even way more as well. So, couple things I want to lift here. You were talking about Ring, that one of the things that these companies do, that they turn law enforcement into their brand ambassadors. And I think there's a particular term for that, like influencer marketing, or so that's what they do. So, for example, when Ring cameras were first being introduced to LAPD, about 100 officers got a whole lot of goodies out of that, and this was all reported. This was all investigated as well. They got a lot of different gadgetry. There were emails that came up, that officers talking to each other, and now they're senior lead officers, and our focus is LAPD going into these community settings as well. So in a sense, they become these, and I'm just going to say that they pimp this thing out. They pimp the violence out into other law enforcement agencies and into rich communities as well to install this thing. Another example is going back to PredPol, the predictive policing program, that if they were not getting gadgetry, PredPol was the first contract they signed was with the LAPD, where the LAPD chief became the chief promoter of PredPol as well, and with the endorsement, which led to PredPol getting another close to about 100 or so contracts. Plug my computer in. So I think in essence, the point here being that when we are talking about these technologies, when we're talking about Amazon, this is the control that they have over local politics, and then the process of through these police foundations, and then the whole process of just bribes that literally go on to the cops, and then their relationships to city council members, or their own side relationships to the police commission. That's why, these things going to city council and police commission. We are here because, typically, as well, I guess one of the speakers said, guardrails, that's the language that we have been fighting for, rather than being having very clear approach abolition, that we will not allow this to happen, and taking a very strong line about it. So that's what they usually take advantage of. So what we have is, and I just want to share something, that as these technologies move, so this is something that we had charted out, and Jacinta, some of you have seen that in the past. This is what we call the stalker state. Now, this thing we mapped out back in 2014, where how streams of information constantly move between law enforcement, between public institutions, between private institutions, between social media companies, between just federal agencies. So all of these companies, when you think about the streams of information, when you try to put a dollar value to all of this, no wonder like $45 billion is just going for DHS's or ICE's high tech investments. So that's where the monetization comes in. That's where, like, another example of Amazon that I can think of is that not only are they helping startups get into law enforcement agencies and get their contracts as well, but they also have a whole process where they help out these companies to get contracts and tap into, for example, the California's multi-million dollar, like a few $100 million contracts around the organized retail theft prevention fund. So that by itself becomes another source of money that gets tapped into. So where, like, as we cover this ground between procurement, between floating the idea, between like who controls. So now what we have is we have Motorola. we have Axon, we have Amazon as some of the big companies. In between is Vigilant Solution, in between is, just other services that they offer as well. So what we will continue to see is that how many different ways the addiction for the use of technology has also been created. Because many a times, and this is, I would also argue that we approach this like predpol and predictive policing technologies, that was all pseudoscience. So it's not just the companies that we have to go after. We have to also bring in the complicity of the academy as well. We have to bring in the complicity of the nonprofits. We have to bring in the complicity of these commissions. So it's an ecology that we have to constantly fight, and then we have to push back and expose as to where this thing is going. And the last thing I want to say is that there was this somebody had we were talking about flock. So and I don't know if somebody mentioned that or not. So this is a Flock's portal that where you can go and extract information out of all of these. So it's clearly an immigration violator, which is included in this portal as well, where ICE or the local law enforcement agencies can go to this portal, and these are just like subcontracts that they have, where we have to be much more vigilant and expose these things. But last thing I would say is, because a lot have already been said, that it fundamentally just comes back to that what sort of grassroots organizing are we having? Because I think popular education is really critical. Political education is very critical, because when we talk about the whole ecology of these things, this is where we are looking at white supremacy, we are looking at racism, we are looking at patriarchy, but scientific objectivity has been added into this whole thing where we are constantly being told that it's inevitable, that it's that we just have to submit and we just have to buy it. And so bringing it back, that I think fundamentals of surveillance have always been analog, because before there was flock, before there was license plate reader, surveillance had been going on for centuries. Now this additional piece of how CompStat, when I started with that, which was an example of this raw data where these sheets were being processed, then Palantir came in, and then they kind of completely shifted in what was used by LAPD in their predictive policing and operational laser program. That processing moved from about 6 to 7 hours that it took people, the analyst, is taking only 5 seconds to do. So in a sense, it's really where the information is being gathered, which of neighborhoods are the most targeted, how that information is used, and it's not just the conventional understanding of a feedback loop where you put racist data in, it's going to be racist output. And it's way beyond the invasion of privacy. This is a methodology that surveillance being the tip of policing knife as how race and poverty and suspect bodies are policed, all about control of land. And again, my very last comment would be that when we are looking at these ICE operations, let's not forget this is everyday policing. Just last year, over 1,300 people were killed by cops. That means every 6 hours and 42 minutes or so, somebody is killed by cops. So the playbook was created by law enforcement agencies. This before there was the FBI, there was the Red Squads in the 1800s. So that lineage we have to be very aware of, that this is not a moment in time, but a continuation of history. So the fight is very much local, and from there we build our national fights and everything else. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for that. And yeah, couldn't agree more. And that is the best way to sort of conclude the series of panelists for tonight. So thank you so much, Hamid. Thank you so much, James, Andrea, Sarah, for all of the amazing insights, all of the great strategy, and all of the fun organizing tidbits that can be incorporated into people's campaigns. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and as folks heard, this is just, one opportunity to build together and learn together. And we are, organizers. We believe in coming together to take the fight and take back tech, right? And so, this is a national convening we have April 17th through 19th in Atlanta, Georgia, which, as we learned earlier, Flock was founded by three Georgia Tech bros. So it turns out they actually have they're based in Atlanta, so maybe there's some fun ideas for that. But really, we want to make sure that all of us here, if you're organizing, if you're building against surveillance in your communities, to hit us up. You can see this and previous recordings linked on Media Justice's YouTube channel. Don't forget to stay in touch. We have an email listserv, and you can follow our social media as well. And we'll be making sure to drop these links in the chat.
Yeah, and just wanted to say thank you so much for everyone that is joining us. We hope that you get a little bit more information and context about the surveillance technology pushed on us through Amazon Ring and Flock's, supposed agreement to work together. Let's keep up the pressure against the oligarchs. Please come to Take Back Tech. We would love to have you there. And if you do have a minute to help us fill out this survey to know your thoughts about the webinar, that really, really helps us to continue to make all of this better. So thank you all so much. Keep resisting, stay safe, and have a great night.